You are about to hear a story that sounds unreal, but every part of it will make sense by the time you reach the end. Because imagine coming back to your land after months away and finding an entire neighborhood already built on it, with roads, driveways, fences, and people living their lives like it was always theirs. And the craziest part is they truly believed it was their land, not mine, until one quiet morning when I stood by the dam I owned and made a decision that no one in that neighborhood will ever forget. Before we go deeper, take a second to like this video and subscribe to HOA Revenge Files, because stories like this only get wilder, and you do not want to miss what is coming next. My name is Daniel, and the land we are talking about has been in my family for decades. It sits just outside a fast-growing town, the kind of place where developers are always looking for the next big expansion. My grandfather bought that land long before any of this growth happened, back when it was mostly fields, trees, and a small water system he built with his own hands, including a controlled dam that regulated water flow to nearby low areas. It was never meant for show. It was built for function, and over the years it became a quiet but powerful part of that property. After my grandfather passed, the land came to me. I did not rush to develop it. I had a full-time job in another state, and I saw this land as something long-term, something I would return to when the time was right. I visited a few times a year, checked boundaries, kept documents updated, and paid my taxes on time. Everything was clean, legal, and recorded. About a year before everything happened, I got a letter from a company expressing interest in buying the land. They talked about building a residential community, modern homes, clean streets, a family-friendly environment. I did not reject the idea completely, but their offer was low, and something about the way they pushed for a fast decision did not sit right with me. So I declined politely and moved on with my life. Months passed, and I did not think much about it, until one weekend I decided to visit the property without telling anyone. I just wanted to walk the land, clear my head, and reconnect with a place that held a lot of memories. But the moment I turned onto the road leading to it, I knew something was wrong, because the dirt path I remembered had been replaced with fresh pavement. There were street signs, new mailboxes, and houses, actual houses standing where open land used to be. At first I thought I made a wrong turn, but then I saw a tree line I recognized and my stomach dropped, because this was my land. There were at least 35 homes already built, some finished, some still under construction. Cars parked in driveways, kids' bikes on lawns, people walking around like this was their neighborhood, and not a single person seemed confused about it. I parked my car and stepped out, trying to stay calm. I walked up to one of the houses where a man was unloading boxes from a truck. I asked him how long the neighborhood had been here, and he looked at me like it was a strange question. He said construction started months ago and people had already started moving in. He told me it was part of a planned HOA community, and everything was approved and legal. That word legal hit me hard, because I knew something was very wrong. I did not argue with him. I just thanked him and walked back to my car. Then I drove around slowly, taking it all in. Every road, every house, every sign felt like a direct challenge to reality, like I had somehow missed an entire chapter of my own life. I went straight to the county office the next morning and requested all records related to my property. I sat there for hours going through documents, permits, approvals, and maps, and what I found was both shocking and calculated. The developer had filed paperwork using a neighboring parcel as a reference point, but the mapped boundaries quietly extended into my land. It was either a massive error or a very deliberate move, and somehow it passed through enough hands without being stopped. I also found out that an HOA had already been formed, rules were in place, fees were being collected, and homeowners had signed agreements believing everything was legitimate. These were not bad people. They were families who trusted the system, and now they were living on land that legally belonged to me. I contacted a lawyer immediately and showed him everything: my original deed, my grandfather's documents, the updated surveys, and the county records. He went through it carefully and then looked at me with a serious expression and said, "You are the legal owner of that land. No question about it." Hearing that confirmed what I already knew, but it also raised a bigger question: what do I do now? Because this was not an empty piece of land anymore. This was a neighborhood with real people, real homes, and real lives, and whatever decision I made would affect all of them. The lawyer explained my options. I could file an immediate injunction to stop all construction and begin the process of reclaiming the land, which would likely lead to lawsuits from every direction, or I could wait, gather more evidence, and let the situation fully develop before taking action. He also mentioned something important about the water system on the property, including the dam. My grandfather built, it was still registered under my name, and it played a role in managing water flow in that area. I drove back to the property that evening and parked at a distance watching the neighborhood. As the sun went down, lights turned on inside. Homes, people sat on porches. Kids played in the streets and everything looked normal, peaceful even. But underneath that calm was a truth none of them knew yet. Over the next few weeks I stayed quiet. I did not confront the HOA directly. I did not go door to door. I let construction continue. I documented everything, took photos, saved records, and worked closely with my lawyer to build a case that was not just strong but undeniable. During that time, I also revisited the dam and the surrounding water channels, checking their condition, understanding how everything connected, because I knew that system was more important than it seemed. One afternoon, I finally received a letter from the HOA. It welcomed me to the community and informed me of rules, fees, and expectations, as if I were just another homeowner on land that I actually owned. I read it twice, then smiled. Not out of humor, but because it showed me exactly how confident they were in their version of reality. I attended one of their meetings without announcing who I was. I sat quietly in the back and listened as they discussed landscaping budgets, parking rules, and future expansion plans. No one questioned the foundation of their authority. No one doubted that they had the right to be there, and that made what I was about to do even more serious. As the weeks turned into months, construction finished on all 35 homes. The neighborhood was complete and fully active. The developer had moved on, profits secured, responsibilities shifted to the HOA, and the families settled into what they believed was a stable community. That is when I decided it was time to act, not with anger, not with noise, but with precision, because this was never about revenge in the way people usually think. It was about truth, ownership, and consequences. And I knew that the moment I stepped forward, everything would change, not just for me, but for everyone living on that land. So I prepared every document, every piece of evidence, every legal argument, and I waited for the right moment to bring it all into the open, while one other piece quietly remained in the background, something no one in that neighborhood had thought about, something connected to the land itself and the system my grandfather left behind, which had the power to shift everything in a way no meeting, no letter, and no rule ever could. The morning I chose to move forward did not feel dramatic on the outside. The sky was clear. The neighborhood looked the same as it had for weeks, calm and settled. But I knew that by the end of that day, nothing about it would feel the same again. I met my lawyer early, and we went over everything one last time. Every document was in order, every record was verified, and there were no gaps left to question. We filed the official claim, and within hours, notices were prepared for the developer, the HOA, and the county. By the afternoon, I was standing at the edge of the property, watching as a process server began delivering papers. Door-to-door confusion spread fast. People stepped outside, reading documents, calling neighbors, trying to understand what was happening. The HOA board gathered near the entrance, speaking in low, urgent voices, and for the first time since I had seen this place, there was uncertainty in the air. Later that day, an emergency HOA meeting was called, and this time I did not sit in the back. Quietly, I walked in with my lawyer and took a seat at the front when they started speaking about the legal notice. I stood up, introduced myself, and told them clearly that I was the legal owner of the land beneath every single home in that neighborhood. The room went silent. Some people laughed at first, thinking it had to be a mistake, but my lawyer placed the deed on the table along with the survey maps and county confirmations, and one by one the expressions in that room changed from disbelief to concern. The HOA president tried to regain control of the meeting, saying, There had to be an error in the records, but my lawyer calmly explained how the boundary misrepresentation happened and how it led to construction. On land that was never legally transferred, the developer was contacted immediately. But like many developers do once the project was completed, they were suddenly harder to reach and less willing to take responsibility. Within days, the situation escalated into legal proceedings. The county began reviewing their own approvals. The HOA hired attorneys and homeowners started asking serious questions about their titles, their mortgages, and their future. Stress built quickly because this was no longer a rumor. It was a documented reality. During that time, I stayed calm and focused. I was not interested in public arguments or emotional reactions. Everything I did was through legal channels, because I knew that was the only way to resolve something this complex correctly. The court scheduled an initial hearing, and as expected, the room was filled with tension. The HOA representatives argued that the homeowners were innocent buyers who acted in good faith, which was true, but ownership of land does not change based on intention. It follows legal record, and that record pointed directly to me. When it was my turn, my lawyer presented the full history of the property, including my grandfather's original purchase, the continuous tax records, and the unchanged deed status. The judge reviewed everything carefully and made it clear that the case was serious and required a full examination before any final decision. But one thing was already certain: the claim had weight, and it could not be dismissed outside the courtroom. People gathered in small groups, talking quietly. Some looked at me with frustration, others with curiosity, and a few with understanding. I did not respond to reactions because I knew emotions were high, and the situation was overwhelming for them. Over the next few weeks, negotiations were attempted. The HOA wanted time. The developer suggested partial compensation, and the county tried to find a procedural solution, but none of those options addressed the core issue, which was that the land itself was never transferred legally, and until that was resolved, nothing else could be considered stable. At the same time, another problem started to appear, something physical, not just legal. The land where the houses were built had always depended on controlled water flow from the dam system. My grandfather built that system, directed excess water safely through channels, especially during heavy rain. Without it, certain areas would begin to collect water slowly at first, then more noticeably. Because of the construction changes, some natural drainage paths had been altered, and without proper integration into the existing system, small signs of water buildup started showing in lower parts of the neighborhood. Nothing extreme at first, just areas that stayed wet longer than expected after rain. But for someone who understood that land, it was a clear warning. I brought this up during one of the discussions with the HOA, and their response was uncertain, because they had never been fully informed about the original water control system. They assumed standard drainage planning had covered everything. But that assumption was based on incomplete knowledge. Days later, after a heavier rain, the issue became more visible. Water pooled near several homes, and people started to worry. The HOA arranged for inspections, but those inspections led back to the same conclusion. The original water system connected to the dam was a key part of how the land functioned, and it was still under my control. I did not act suddenly or irresponsibly. I followed every legal guideline related to property use and infrastructure, but I made it clear that the system on my land would be managed according to my ownership rights and existing regulations, not according to the needs of a development that was built without my consent. As legal pressure increased, the developer finally reappeared in the conversation, trying to negotiate a settlement that would allow them to purchase the land retroactively. But now the situation had changed. The value was different, the risk was higher, and the timeline was no longer in their favor. The court scheduled a more detailed hearing to review both the ownership claim and the impact of the construction on the land's natural systems, including water management. This brought everything together: the legal facts, the physical reality, and the consequences of decisions that had been made months earlier without proper verification. On the day of that hearing, the courtroom was even more intense than before. Experts presented reports, Maps were analyzed and the connection between the dam system and the neighborhood's stability was explained clearly. It became obvious that this was not just a paperwork issue. It was a foundational problem that affected both ownership and safety. When I was asked about my position, I spoke simply and clearly. I said that I never intended to create harm or disruption, but I could not ignore the fact that my land had been used without permission, and that the systems tied to it could not be separated from the land itself. I also stated that any resolution had to fully recognize ownership and account for the impact already created. The judge listened carefully and made it clear that a forced resolution would not benefit anyone involved. Instead, all parties were encouraged to reach an agreement that respected the law and minimized further damage. But it was also clear that if an agreement could not be reached, the court would make a final ruling based on the evidence presented. In the days that followed, serious negotiations finally began. The HOA representatives approached the situation with a different tone, now focused less on control and more on resolution. Homeowners wanted stability above all else, and the developer faced increasing pressure to correct their mistake. Eventually, a structured agreement was reached. The land would be formally purchased, from me at a value that reflected not just its original worth, but the current reality and impact. The transaction would secure legal ownership for the homeowners and integrate the water management system properly under regulated oversight, ensuring long-term stability. When everything was finalized, the tension that had filled that neighborhood slowly faded. People returned to their routines, but with a deeper understanding of how quickly things can change when details are overlooked and assumptions are made. As for me, I stepped away with closure, knowing that I had protected what was mine and handled the situation without chaos or shortcuts. The land remained meaningful, but now it carried a different story, one that would always remind me how important it is to stand firm when something is not right. If you made it this far, you already know this was not just about land or houses. It was about patience, truth, and consequences. So tell me in the comments what you would have done if you were in my place, and share this story with someone who appreciates real-life situations that take unexpected turns. And if you want more stories like this, make sure you stay with HOA Revenge Files, because there is always another story waiting that will make you think twice about what you see on the surface.